What is derealization and depersonalization, and why is it linked to anxiety? I'm Joshua Fletcher, also known as Anxiety Josh, and I'm a psychotherapist and previous sufferer of various anxiety disorders. This video is for people who experience the symptoms of derealization and depersonalization, why it's there, and what we can do about it. Well, first of all, let's look at what derealization and depersonalization feel like. Derealization is when you suddenly feel this sense of detachment from where you are. Things look the same, but they don't feel connected. Maybe they look far away or up close. Maybe they're distorted in some way. Maybe you're in a very similar room, but it feels very unfamiliar. People's faces might look like clay. It's a really weird dissociative state that can scare people if they don't know what it's about. Whilst derealization looks at our perception of things around us, depersonalization is very inwards. So when we don't feel like we're in our own body, we might be able to kind of see and observe ourselves in third person. Our hands look kind of strange and weird, and we can hear our voice, but we don't feel connected to it. It's very strange. We can often feel light, we can often feel heavy, and our senses are warped in some way. Both can occur at once. It certainly did for me. It's what triggered my anxiety disorder, and then I used to worry about it, fixate on it all day. Yeah, I remember one morning I went into work and I was making a cup of tea, and I suddenly looked up and everything looked really strange. Felt like I was in the Matrix, like I just peeked behind the code of what existence was. Also, because I'm human, and like many of us, I tried to work out why I felt the way I did. So I was bombarded with all these intrusive existential thoughts like, what is life, what is consciousness, why am I here? And looking at loved ones when you feel dissociated, when you're going through derealization and depersonalization, is a very strange and scary phenomenon. If this applies to you, first of all, notice you're okay, you're not going crazy. A lot of people with DPDR think they're going crazy, they're losing their minds, and their anxious mind tries to suggest things to them like, what if you have a brain tumor? What if there's something wrong in your mind? What if the doctors have missed something? And it can become an obsession, because when we don't understand something, we start to observe it all day. I certainly did this, and it was part of my anxiety disorder. If this applies to you, just stay sat where you are, and I'll show you why it sticks around and what we can do to alleviate it. If you're the kind of person who needs to understand what's happening in their mind and body during times of uncertainty, then this part of the video will help you. The first thing we've got to understand is that the fight or flight response, the threat response, is responsible for so many bodily changes when we're under threat. This affects certain lobes and parts of our brain. The first lobe it affects is the occipital lobe, which is responsible for visual processing. There's a slight delay in visual processing when we're in fight or flight or really stressed. Because of certain changes in the brain, it's prioritizing targeting threat as opposed to us trying to live our normal lives. When we're in threat mode, this also affects the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for self-awareness and emotional regulation, which would explain why we feel fearful and not quite ourselves in episodes of DPDR. There's also research that points to changes in the temporoparietal junction, which is a lobe in our brain responsible for integrating sensory input. And it helps to maintain a coherent sense of self in the world. If this is affected, then no wonder we feel a bit, whoa, I don't feel like myself, what's going on? We end up down the existential rabbit hole. Now you're probably thinking, all right, Josh, that's all good and well, but how do I stop this? Most of my clients, followers on Instagram and things will say, well, thanks for the education, but Josh, how can we stop it? Well, if you're watching this video, then what I'm going to assume is there is a fear of this symptom. And this is really important to establish. DPDR is not dangerous. Obviously, do your due diligence and check with a medical professional to do tests and provide assurances for yourself. But for the majority of people with anxiety and anxiety disorders, DPDR can become a sticky cycle of anxiety. We see the symptom, we don't like it, we're scared of it, so we try to get rid of it, and then it comes back. What happens is The amygdala in our brain, which is responsible for triggering threat and observing threat, suddenly gets confused. And we suddenly begin to fear DPDR. If you're someone who's scared of derealization and depersonalization, what's happened here is that you've developed a phobia of what is a relatively harmless symptom. And so we get pulled into compulsions. The most common anxious compulsions or safety behaviors for people with anxiety disorders are checking to see if it's there, checking to see if it's got worse or better. How long have you spent on Google or Reddit and reading horror stories because you're trying to find reassurance? So checking and reassurance are two of the most common compulsions with DPDR. This anxiety cycle keeps us stressed and it keeps us anxious. Here's the thing, I used to do this. I used to wake up and check to see if I was dissociated. Every time I was busy and distracted, I noticed it less. However, my default thought back when I had time to myself was to say, is it there? Is it gone? Why is it there? It used to be triggers for panic attacks, so I used to try and avoid anything dissociative. It started to trickle into my personal life, and this happens for many people, where you avoid going out, or I'd avoid having a couple of beers because I didn't want anything to happen that would remind me of that feeling. I'd avoid going to the gym because I didn't like having a lightheaded feeling because it felt a lot like derealization and depersonalization. I'd avoid caffeine, even though I love coffee. And all these behaviors are compulsive and safety behaviors. And these are signaling to the brain that DPDR is dangerous. To overcome DPDR, the simple answer is we have to learn to leave it alone. And this is mostly to do with our attention. You must label when you're scanning and monitoring for it as a compulsion. Because non-anxious you wouldn't be doing that. If you go about your day doing what non-anxious you would do, you send signals to the amygdala that says, I don't mind that this is here. But when you're in the cycle of anxiety, you send signals to the amygdala to say DPDR is dangerous. The amygdala is observing you at all times. It's going, why are you checking for this? Why are you comparing it to this morning? Why are you avoiding? Why are you constantly seeking reassurance? And you start this behavior anxiety feedback loop, which the amygdala thinks, all right, okay, I'll help out. I'll keep looking out for the danger for you. It's a bit similar to a phobia of anything. If you have a phobia of dogs and you walk through the park, you maintain that phobia by avoiding dogs and by scanning and looking for them. I used to do this all the time, and it's exhausting. And if you're in this situation now, then my compassion goes out to you. It's not a nice place to be in, but it is a cycle. You're not going crazy. You're not losing your mind. You're just obsessed with a symptom and a feeling that you don't like. We practice with the symptom and we practice allowing DPDR to be there. Once I started to do that, I started to rewire the amygdala and I erased the secondary fear that dictates all anxiety disorders. This approach pretty much applies to any symptom, although I will do other videos relating to other symptoms. Derealization and depersonalization are very common symptoms of anxiety. I know it can feel isolating and I know it can get you down. But if you're watching this video, give yourself a pat on the back because you are trying to do something about it. You will get there, and the windows of feeling lucid and on the planet will increase in size. But don't forget what the task is. We're teaching the brain that this symptom is okay. So observe the moments when you're resisting it because we don't want the amygdala to keep chiming in, releasing adrenaline and cortisol and making us feel scared. If you'd like to hear myself and another qualified therapist in anxiety disorders talk about the symptom, tune into the Disordered podcast. We've done a couple of episodes on this topic, including sharing our own experiences with it. If you like this video, please give it a like or a subscribe and all that nonsense. And you can follow me on social media as well. I'm Anxiety Josh. Have a lovely rest of your week. You're allowed to.